I see a lot of people who have a lot of schooling, but they don't have really a lot of education.
You've just confirmed that music is good medicine.
You got two choices. You can either be down all the time, or you can look at it on the lighter side.
Hello and welcome to Elder Wisdom, Stories from the Green Bench. I'm your host for these bi-weekly podcasts. My name is Erin Davis, and my co-host Lloyd Hetherington is here with us. And I'd like to give you just a Twitter-length idea of what we do here, or Cole's Notes if you prefer. Long before the podcast, the Green Bench was created at Schlegel Village's retirement and long-term care homes as a place of sharing stories, a symbol of elder wisdom where we get to sit alongside a senior, share a conversation, or maybe give and offer advice. When so many of us are missing each other, this allows us a connection with some very special people who have great stories to tell. Joining me on the Green Bench as always, and I am so lucky, is my co-host Lloyd. He's a Schlegel Village's resident, a dad and grandfather, widower and retired leader and educator. And wait till you meet our guest today. Doug Reed has had a life in media, in radio, TV, and print news. He even worked at my former radio home, CHFI in Toronto, for a brief time. He's had a life full of giving back through the Salvation Army and countless community organizations. Well, now Doug lives in Ailsa Craig at the village of Arbor Trails in Guelph. He even has a show called Doug Reed Musings on Parry Sound Eastern Shore's online radio. Well, I'm so excited, and I know that Lloyd is too, to have Doug Reed joining our Elder Wisdom Green Bench today. And as a radio veteran, you know, Doug, it's going to be really hard not to spend, 4 hours talking about radio. But we're going to keep it even, and we're going to keep it bright and tight. How's that sound?
Well, I had my breakfast, and I'm roaring to go.
Glad to hear it. Now, I know that you have your own show, and I don't know if you tell any jokes, but I thought that you and Lloyd might appreciate this because we're going to be talking about the Salvation Army in a little bit, too. So here we go. An angel is talking to God, and the angel says, "Hey, God, what are you doing?" And God says, "I'm making Canadians." And the angel says, "Oh, they're so nice." And God says, "Ha, wait till I drop the puck."
Oh, that scores well.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Now, besides a career in radio, TV, and print journalism, Doug, let's talk about the very deep connection you have with Lloyd's work in the Salvation Army.
I was on the phone with Lloyd the other day, and we started comparing Salvation Army officers that we both knew.
Wow.
I started with the Salvation Army shortly after I left newspapering, and the commanding officer at that time used to come over and do proofreading before we went next door and had fish and chips. And he invited me to come over on a Saturday while he was working on his Sunday program. He started telling me about some of the songs that they were going to sing on Sunday. And I thought, my gosh, those were the same songs we sang when I was a kid at the YMCA Sunday night at song service. And one thing led to another. I ended up being a uniformed officer. I was the welcome sergeant. I think I did 200 or 300 services. I did a number of funerals, and I was part of the Red Shield campaign. We set up our soup kitchen, and so when Lloyd talked Salvation Army talk, I was happy to share some horror stories.
And some wonderful stories too, I'm sure, Lloyd?
Doug, you're the type of person who helps to make the Salvation Army what it is. We're really a small organization, and if it wasn't for people like you who step forward and give so freely of their time and energy and creativity, I don't think we'd get anywhere.
Well, thank you. We got along extremely well. Our Christmas cheer program was always a success. We often prepared 300 or 400 hampers at Christmas time. And then, because I had gone to a Quaker boarding school, they asked me if I could set up a shelter for homeless males. And I thought, well, gee, I'd gone to a boarding school. This will be a breeze. Well, it wasn't quite a breeze. But over 6 years, we hosted 500 or 600 males ranging age from 16 to 83. We taught them how to read. We taught them how to shop. We made sure that they had medical appointments. We found alternative housing for them, and it was just a wonderful experience.
It would be a wonderful experience, Doug, because you provided them safety and security, but you provided them dignity, you provided them with pride. You contributed so much to enrich the lives of those who had so very little. You're the type of man who makes the difference.
Well, we talked about the helpless, the homeless, and the hungry in Midland, which is about 30 miles north of Barrie. We call it the gateway to the 30,000 islands, and that's something in itself. My parents and I, we grew up in Woodstock, but we had a cottage at Ellenwood Beach, east of Wasaga Beach, and eventually I ended up at the radio station in Midland, and I ended up being there some 60 years before moving here to Elsa Craig a year ago. And so when the opportunity came to set up the Shelter Experience House for males, we did. We helped establish a soup kitchen at the Presbyterian Church. We also set up another soup kitchen at an Anglican church in Newmarket. And it just seemed to be an offshoot of the way I had grown up. I was adopted by some loving Christian folk, and I guess it was my way of saying thank you and paying something back.
It makes such a difference, doesn't it? Paying back for all the benefits that you have received. I long to see more people recognize how blessed they are, and they'd be willing to share that blessing with others.
Well, I think, again, that I was adopted by some wonderful people. My mother had a number of miscarriages, and they adopted a girl a couple of years older than me, and then I was adopted, and then by magic, she had two homegrown daughters, and so I was the spoiled boy, and then I had three sisters.
When you were in the Salvation Army, did you use any of your broadcasting or journalistic talents in your role there as well, Doug?
Well, one of the things I did was work the control board, and so especially during the final prayer, and so I would play this background music, and I guess one day I got caught singing when I was playing in the control room by myself, and one of the officers heard me singing, and he said, this weekend the staff band is performing, and I wonder if you would take over Sunday morning service. And I loved it, and I when no one else was available, I was there. Once my mother and father came, and someone suggested maybe they would have bagpipes and they would play Amazing Grace. And the next thing I knew, there were 6 bagpipers, and the ceiling in the Citadel was rather low, and it was pretty noisy. And at the end of the service, as we were greeting folks as they were leaving the Citadel, my mother kept hitting me on my arm and, Dougie, 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 I'm so proud of you, but I hate bagpipe music.
With respect, there's the old joke about the difference between an onion and a bagpipe is that no one cries when you put a knife in a bagpipe. But anyway. And I know we all love the bagpipes, and especially Amazing Grace. Let's talk a little bit, Doug, about the Amazing Grace that brought you to broadcasting when you were actually physically on your way to Detroit, Michigan to do something completely different. Will you share that story with us?
Well, let me go way, way back to the war years. My mom and father owned a fur store, and there were 4 children, so we were shuffled off to different babysitters. Mine happened to live on a farm in Burgessville, south of Woodstock, and so I loved growing up on the farm. And every lunch hour, the farmer would come in, Mr. Braud, and he'd turn on the BBC, and he'd listen to what was going on overseas concerning the war. And I was absolutely intrigued that something would be coming out of this box. And often I would stand on a stool and play with the dials. And then I started to pretend that I was a radio announcer back home. I used my father's sunbeam razor on the end of a electric razor on the end of a clothesline or something, and pretended that was a microphone. And I had a record player, and I read some old weather reports and so on. Later on, my dad would take his advertising to CKOX in Woodstock, and I'd tag along, and I was hooked. So in high school, I did high review on a couple of occasions. At the time, I was taking flying lessons, and I continued to apply at the radio station, but without any luck. So I thought, well, I might as well go to hitchhike to Detroit and join the Marine Corps. And this is how silly I was, because I thought I could fly planes and I wouldn't have to go to boot camp. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Well, you talk about the Lord's hand at work. My chum and I were picked up by a guy who was heading to Windsor. Turns out he was the engineer at CKLW, and he took us through the radio station, and then he said, I can take you right to a Marine headquarters, or I can kick you in the fanny and send you home. And he said, I think, your career is broadcasting, so I would want you to head back. Well, we got a ride, believe it or not, right straight to Woodstock. As we were walking down the main street, there comes the program director in the station van, and I yelled at him, and he said, Reed, I am so sick and tired of you sending me mail. You can start tomorrow.
Lovely, lovely.
Wear 'em down, eh, Doug?
That was a lesson well learned.
We never stop learning, and I think at age 83 now, you doing a show and actually voice tracking is absolute proof of that. So you're able to record your show, you send it to the radio station, and they air it there. Could you ever, in a million years, have imagined that you'd be doing that? And of course, this podcast with Lloyd and with me, this whole different platform. It really just shows you should never close your mind or say that you're done with anything, doesn't it?
Back home, I was on town council. I was a volunteer firefighter. I was a Shriner, a Mason. I was an altar server at the Anglican Church. I was in Kiwanis and Wiseman's Club. I was just involved in each and every time. It was, I think, paying back, and to do the full circle, it's been phenomenal. And for that, I have to thank Bob Boland, because Bob and I started at the radio station in Woodstock back in the 50s, and I was aware of what he was doing up at Perry Sound. And when this thing came up, and when COVID kind of shut everything down over at the radio station at the university, this just dovetailed quite nicely, and I started just one night a week, and now it's 7 nights a week. And the other day, Bob says, we need somebody to do the afternoon shows and give prizes away. But I'm still at that point. I'm trying to figure out how to inject my voice tracks in between these recordings. But you say it's easy, so I'll believe you.
I'm so glad to see that the Salvation Army has brought in the technology of tap in the past year, because my husband and I have rung the bells as well for the Salvation Army, as did our late daughter. She loved doing that in the Byward Market in Ottawa. But now, of course, with no touch, and so many people, like I would hang out outside the liquor store on behalf of the Salvation Army, I should clarify. And that's where our spot was. But, when so many people are just going in to use tap or credit cards, and now the Salvation Army in so many ways has moved into the future and gotten the cashless donations too. So it's a wonderful thing. And to hear you both talking about the way that you've given back and made altruism and volunteering such a big part of your life. Doug, I have to ask you this. Knowing broadcasters as I do, and for so long, the industry has been, and I think I can say honestly, probably manned by mostly people who have had several marriages, a fair amount of problems with, say, alcohol or addiction of different kinds, and all of the trappings that radio used to entail. How much do you think that your volunteering and your faith and the strength of what you were brought up in saved you from that path that undoubtedly you saw so many of your peers go down?
I've been lucky, I think, in I started in radio in 1957, and I had some quality people, the same in the newspapering business. I had guys who knew what they were talking about, and their work was first class, and so we didn't have any hard drinkers, maybe until I got to North Bay. And I think at North Bay they had nothing better to do. But I would have paid to work in radio. I mean, I find myself playing records and introducing the darn things. And so I've been lucky. The other thing, and I don't know if this dovetails at all, but my dad, Mom and Dad owned a fur store, and he was also a pioneer in the credit union movement, and he established over 60 credit unions in the world. And Dad set up some kind of a device that it would turn the radio on, and he had a tape machine, and he would tape the first hour. Then he would wake up at 7, and at coffee that morning at the Rochdale Credit Union, he'd turn on the tape and listen to what he had missed. I was lucky, I guess. I'm in my second marriage. It's one of those we will never marry again, and I ended up meeting a wonderful Dutch pastry chef.
Ooh.
and need I say more? Mm-hmm. But in my first life, we were supported, and my son Tim used to carry my camera with me when I was at CKVR in Barrie. Mm-hmm. And who would have thought Tim would have ever got into the television business? But he's been, I guess, at least 35 years producing news. He did a couple of dandy documentaries. One was on the end of the Avril Arrow. A lot of people said, oh, that was CTV that produced it, and other people said, no, that was CBC. And Tim said, no, it was me. I got a grant from the feds, and I worked on the Avril Arrow. So the Secrecy Act had ended. Mm-hmm. At the time my son started to work on it. He was out at A Channel in Edmonton. Mm-hmm. And always at the Midland Free Press, where I was also the manager, we were always looking for an April Fool's joke to put on the front page. And the publisher's father had worked at AV Row, and he brought a model of their hovercraft, the flying saucer. And so we took a picture of it, and we went down to the park and burned a couple of spots to make it look like the hovercraft had landed there. And so I was talking to my son about the Avril Arrow and the hovercraft, and he picked up the ball and ran with it.
That's amazing. And of course, now you'd be the lead story on websites all over the place because nobody checks to see if it's an April Fool's joke anymore.
No.
Well, we used to have there was a thing called Magazine Island out in the harbor at Midland, and the real estate guy said that they were going to put a bridge over to the island. And so there was always something. Another one, a little lake in the middle of Midland is fed by a spring, and so I took a picture of a guy wearing a paper bag over his head and said he bought the lake. He was going to drain it and just have a fountain with that spring. And that was a good story until Thompson newspapers heard about it, and I was chastised, I think.
Ew. Yeah, you were almost working for the North Bay Nugget then, weren't you?
Yes.
Just a bit. Way you go. Way you go. Later on, when you saw something in your community, you also used that background in communication that you had. It's so funny, community, communication, how they tie together, Doug, to make differences not only for your fellow human that you were just talking to there, but for the community in general. Do you have an example of that for us?
I guess it comes down to realizing there's a need, and then trying to get that need resolved by drawing the attention to those people who can probably take care of that business. I guess the other thing, the last thing I would say, somebody said, do you have advice for young people? And I would say this: if you love doing something, I don't care if you love playing baseball, if you love being an artist, if you love that, try to do it commercially, because I'll bet you a ton of money there's a place for you in the world of commerce. And that's what I did. I, as a young kid, always wanted to be like Erin. And she's older than me.
Oh, you brat.
And,
I was just thinking what a lovely person you were too, Doug. Goodness. Oh, jeez. There is a beautiful Chinese proverb on helping others. Do you have that, Lloyd? Do you have that in front of you that you could read it for us?
If you want happiness for an hour, take a nap. If you want happiness for a day, go fishing. If you want happiness for a month, get married. If you want happiness for a year, inherit a fortune. If you want happiness for a lifetime, help somebody else.
Isn't that lovely? What do people ask you most often, Doug, about your career and your life and your volunteering? What do people want to know about you, and what do you most like to talk about?
I love going to a restaurant and just listening to other people. And it's interesting, so many people say, I went to the Cayman Islands, the food sucked, the people were wretched, and you never hear anybody say, gee, we had a lot of fun. I love going into a grocery store and finding a manager, and I point, you see that cashier way down at cash register number 13? And they say, oh boy, here it comes. And then I say, not 15, number 6. Yes. And what is her name? Her name is Anne-Marie. I got to tell you, Anne-Marie is terrific. And I've got to talk to Mr. Super or Mr. Store and just let them know that she's terrific. It's so easy, it's so easy to bellyache, Aaron, as you well know. But why not say something nice? I remember at any radio station I worked at, my ratings were always the highest, but on occasion you'd get a miserable letter, and that would be the letter posted on the bulletin board. There was nothing in the old orchid file, as the old police used to say. So anyway, I just like to listen to folks. I like to interject. And within days of moving here, we went to a concert next door. And my wife said to me, there's blood rushing out of your face, and do you feel right? And I said, I think I got a bit of a pain in my chest. And she says, what's the problem? And I said, look in front of me, all those people with white hair. And she whispered, Doug, you're 82.
But Doug, you know very well that chronological numbers mean nothing. I met old people at 60 and I met young people at 90. You may be surrounded with people who are chronologically old, but they're young at heart.
We have a guy, he's 99, and he's got the greatest radio voice I've ever heard. And during the war, he was a navigator in Lancaster bombers. Oh. And what stories he has. And he acted on stage, he did some movie work, he did some commercials. But when you hear his voice, I thought, boy, it was his voice in my brain. We could go somewhere. We could probably work with Aaron and do the morning show.
Well, I do need someone to be the eye candy. So between you and him, Doug, I think that would be just fantastic. Oh, my gosh. And I'm kidding. Of course, my dad was a career pilot, both on Civvy Street and with the Armed Forces. And he always talked about the Lancaster pilot who was in his residence, too. The stories they tell. But it's so important, and I know that Lloyd will agree, just to listen. It's why we've got one mouth and two ears.
Yes, absolutely.
If you listen, you pick up such gems of wisdom. People have a lot to share. We've got to find ways of harvesting it.
I have grandchildren, and their life is the iPad. And when I grew up, we gathered underneath the street light on our bicycles, and we had so much fun. We played road hockey. We did all kinds of silly things, but it was wonderful. And now, I saw a picture the other day, everybody around the Christmas table, and everybody had an iPad, and there was Grandpa carving the turkey, It's unreal. We've got to listen to stories. And what I try to do with Tim, my son, and with our grandkids is to tell them some of the stories that I've shared here. I read about my ancestors, and one of them turned out to be the last guy ever to be involved in a duel down around Jarvis, Ontario, back in the 1800s.
Ooh.
So that's a story to relate to next of kin.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's why you've got your radio show, too, because the best radio is, as my guru, Valerie Geller, would say, tell the truth. Start with your best material. Never be boring. Make it matter. And most importantly, talk to one person. And no matter if you're talking to 100 or 100,000, it's that one person. And I know the one person listening to our podcast today is so grateful to you, Doug, for your stories, your warmth, your volunteering, your faith, your giving back, and your immense sense of humor. We must never discount how important a sense of humor is right now these days.
I'm shy.
Oh.
I mean, it's the most amazing thing. Oh my gosh, when I would go to church, the music would be playing, and Dad, he would have hay fever, so he would lead the way, so that it would be my father, my mother, my older sister, me, and then my two younger sisters, and Dad would sneeze all the way down to our pew, and I hated doing that. But when I look back, and some years ago, I can remember as a kid, my feet would never reach the floor, and so I would sit in the pew and my feet would dangle back and forth. And then when Dad passed away, I sat there in the same pew, and I looked down at my feet, and I just said, Dad, my feet touched the floor. Anyway, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm really, really honored. And Aaron, again, I'm so proud of you. You're what you've done. I'm just proud of you.
Oh, thank you, Doug. That means the world to me. And Lloyd and I are just so grateful that you came around and played on our radio show today. What a great, fun podcast this has been. And I wish you lots and lots more years on the airwaves in whatever form they may be. I just know you're just going to keep morphing with the times, and it's a wonderful thing. Keep sharing the love and the inspiration and your messages. You're so uplifting.
Thank you. And I used to sign off like this, and so ends tonight's broadcasting.
There you go.
Doug, it's been so lovely talking to you. Your ideas, your enthusiasm, your sense of humor is just so precious. I'm sure we'll be in touch again. In the meantime, enjoy life, enjoy your communication, have a marvelous time.
We could have chatted with Doug for hours, but our time here on the Green Bench has come to an end. For now, Lloyd and I are so looking forward to our next chat with Schlegel resident Judy Stefnitz, a woman and retired RN whose life as a mom and a daughter saw her face more than her share of challenges, but who has come out with a sense of positivity and a perspective you won't want to miss. Just please subscribe for additional episodes every 2 weeks. We'll let you know just as soon as they're up. Share your thoughts and opinions on social media using hashtag #ElderWisdom to help others find us on this green bench. And please, if you would, could you take a moment to rate and review the Elder Wisdom podcast? If it's easier, go to www.elderwisdom.ca to find the link. I'm Erin Davis. Thank you for sharing in these life stories, and Lloyd and I will talk to you again soon, because your seat on the green bench is ready and waiting.
Elder Wisdom, Stories from the Green Bench, is brought to you by Schlegel Villages, a complete continuum of care, offering independent living to long-term care, celebrating and honoring the wisdom of the elder. To learn more about us, please go to our website, schlegelvillages.com.